Hello, I'm Jeremy Collins, the Director of Conferences and Symposia at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. Thanks for tuning in to World War II On Topic, Veteran Voices. This episode is brought to you by the museum's Education Department and the Jenny Craig Institute for the Study of War and Democracy. In April of 2020, Dr. Tyler Bamford, who was serving as the Institute's Leventhal Research Fellow, had a conversation with museum volunteer and World War II veteran Steve Ellis. Steve served in the U.S. Navy from 1944 to 1946 aboard LST-751. He took part in the campaigns to liberate the Philippines and survive Japanese Kamikaze attacks. Here he recounts those harrowing experiences.
I am the Alan and Sherry Leventhal Research Fellow here at the National World War II Museum in the Institute for the Study of War and Democracy. And today, it is my pleasure to be joined by Judge Steve Ellis, a World War II veteran of the U.S. Navy from 1944 to 1946. And I'm going to be interviewing him about his wartime service today, and then we'll open it up to questions. So we look forward to a great discussion. Thanks so much for joining me today, Steve.
My pleasure.
So let's jump right into it. To give us a sense before the war of what your childhood was like. Where did you grow up and go to school?
Well, I grew up in New Orleans, and I went to New Orleans Academy, which is a small private military school. So I was in uniform from the time I was 6 years old. My mother taught there, which is why I was going. But I graduated in 1941. And after I graduated, I knew I was going to Tulane because I'd won a scholarship there. But my daddy took me up to the Navy building in Tulane and signed me up for the ROTC. Now, that was fine with me because I kind of liked the Navy anyhow. And a bunch of my classmates also joined, and some of my friends from other schools joined. So I knew a lot of people in it. And that got me started.
So you were already in school at Tulane when Pearl Harbor was attacked, is that right?
Yeah, I was already in the Navy, and so I was safe from the draft. I was also too young to be drafted, but anyhow, I was safe from the draft. I was in service before the war started.
So did you specifically want to join the Navy, or was that kind of just the easiest thing to do, or what made you choose the Navy?
Well, kind of all of the above. My daddy really wanted me to be in the Navy, and I knew a little bit about it, and I really liked the way the uniforms looked. So that was a good thing for me to do.
It's all about the uniforms, all about the looks. So had you ever been on a boat before? Had you ever been on a boat before this?
Rowboat. I've been in a canoe and maybe a sailboat. That's about it.
And so, based on that experience, you were like, what's great? I'm going to spend my war at sea. Okay. So you were commissioned in February of 1944 at the age of 19. So what kind of training did you get in the Navy?
Well, in the ROTC, we were trained to, we learned the language, fore and aft and up, right and left, port and starboard, all that. So we learned all that in school. We learned basic seamanship and naval tradition and that sort of thing, but nothing of real practical use except navigation in my junior year. And then after I was commissioned, we were commissioned a year early. I still had another year to go in school, but they needed warm bodies to officer these amphibious ships that they were building by the hundreds. And so they took all the junior classes and all the ROTC units in the whole country and slapped a stripe on their sleeves in February 1944. And 4 days later, I was on a train headed for Camp Bradford, Virginia. Now, Bradford was where they trained people for the LST program. The LCTs and LCIs were trained further up Chesapeake Bay at Solomons. We all went to Camp Bradford, which sat right next to Little Creek on Chesapeake Bay at Hampton Roads. And there were 15,000 people on that base when I got there. It was all Quonset huts. It was not a permanent building on the place. It was terrible because the officers' club only served beer and pig's knuckles. And it was just wasn't a really nice place to be. When we got there, everybody who hadn't been assigned to a class was sent to a place called the Happy Hour Club, which was anything but. And you sat there with nothing to do all day long. Finally, I got put in the class. I was tabbed to be a gunnery officer, and other guys got other jobs. One of my classmates became a stores officer, and Eddie Martin, my dear friend, became a communications officer. And miracle of miracles, we wound up in the same crew. After I finished my gunnery training, that was 2 weeks, I joined up with 5 other guys who had also had 2 weeks training on how to be a captain, an exec, and a communications officer. And we trained together for 2 weeks. We went out on LSTs and practiced running drills and things like that, and went to classes. And then at the end of that 2 weeks, we joined up with our crew, 120 men that had been going through the same thing. And so we stayed with that crew for another 2 weeks, going out on LSTs and practicing running drills and that sort of thing, shooting the guns. And at the end of that 2 weeks, we got on a train and went to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where they were building the LST 751.
So did you choose to be a gunnery officer? Or did the Navy say, Steve, you're now a gunnery officer?
They blessed me with that, yes. I had no choice in the matter.
So you were assigned to an LST, and for our viewers, what is an LST?
Okay, LST stands for Landing Ship Tank. It's an ocean-going ship which, when properly configured, can run up on an invasion beach and discharge cargo right onto the beach. It was a novel innovation. Nobody had had anything like that before. The idea was basically Winston Churchill's, and he wanted an ocean-going ship that could beach, and he sent it to his admiralty. They brought it to our Navy Department. They assigned it to a naval aviator, and everything about what he did is still a matter of record. That they still have the napkin on which he drew his original concept for the ship. It's sitting in a ballroom somewhere.
It's not a terribly graceful-looking ship. What did you think the first time you saw one?
Well, what did I know? I'd never seen a ship before anyhow. And I got to see my first one while I was still in school. They brought one through New Orleans and took my whole class down there to look at it. I mean, little did we know that that's what our fate was going to be. But if you take the 965 off of that picture and put 751, you'd have my ship.
They're very large ships, though. They're 2,100 tons, and your crew, you said, was about 120 men?
Yeah.
And so
long and 50 feet wide. It had a flat bottom. You notice that the front 2/3 of the ship is all right down at the main deck. Underneath the main deck, right? I can't find a point. Right underneath the main deck is what we call the tank deck. And you could fill up the tank deck with rolling stock. We only carried tanks once, but we carried trucks and Jeeps and half tracks and you name it. Anything that you could drive on and drive off, we carried. And they would load up the tank deck, and then they would load up the main deck. So we could have 40 or 50 vehicles on board, plus the crews, the guy that ran the vehicles. And we had accommodations along either side for maybe 250 men besides our crew. And since we had to feed them when we were at sea, we had great big ice boxes. And we carried a large assortment of food, and we had a very good stores officer. So on the 751, we really ate well, and so did the guys we carried.
And that's the most important thing when you're at sea, isn't it?
You better believe it.
What was your job on your LST?
Okay, I'm the gunnery officer. Now, on the ship, we had 7 40-millimeter anti-aircraft guns and 12 20-millimeter anti-aircraft guns. Those big tubs you see at the front of the 965 are what held held the 40 millimeter guns. And along the side of the ship, I don't know if I can make them out, but along the side of the ship, 6 on either side were the 20 millimeter guns. They ran all the way back to the stern, and then we had 4 more 40s on the stern of the ship. My job was to see that those guns were always in firing condition, and that the people who manned the gun were properly trained, and that's what I did.
That's a pretty important job, especially in a war zone. Very
important in a war zone. I have to say that we really got very few opportunities to use the guns. We fired them during our shakedown cruise, and we fired them once or twice when we were crossing the Pacific Ocean at a balloon, which I hate to say survived. And almost every time we fired the gun, something went wrong. I'd have to go down and fix the jam or something like that. But the first time we were in combat during the invasion of the Philippines was the first time every gun worked the way it was supposed to, and we never had another lick of trouble after that.
But, that's what the guns just needed a little bit of pressure. That's what they needed. And I'm sure every time after one malfunctioned, or every time when the crew didn't hit something, you're like, that's not my fault. It's not the gun's fault. That's your fault for your aim.
Well, it's really very difficult to shoot a duck with a shotgun. And when your duck is an airplane and it's going 200 miles an hour, and you have nothing but your eyes to get you onto the target, it's not easy.
Not at all.
We hit 2 of them that wanted to crash into us, and so when it counted, we hit the right guy.
There you go. That's when it matters.
Right.
So you started out as a gunnery officer, but did you do any other duties on the ship after that?
Well, yeah, the executive officer was supposed to be the navigator, and while we were at Camp Bradford, in order to kill time, I'd taken a refresher course in navigation. So that was on my record. Well, we were going to pick up our overseas cargo in Gulfport, Mississippi, and we ran into Ship Island, a very large island.
Oh, wow.
It's hard to miss, and we didn't. We hit it, and we had to be towed off the beach, and of course we meant the beach, so it was okay. But we were towed off the beach, and the next morning the captain said I was the navigator. So from then until we got across the Pacific Ocean, I was also, in addition to being the gunnery officer, I was the navigator. After the war, I was also captain of the ship. I can tell you, being exec is a lot harder. But Alice was a good ship, and I can't say it ran itself, but it was well run when I got my job as exec, and it continued to be after that.
The executive officer has to make the captain look good.
Oh yeah. Well, Eddie was easy. It was easy to make him look good. He was a natural leader, and he just stepped into the job as skipper from being communications officer. Never missed a lick. Really was good.
The National World War II Museum's Historic Research Services actually pulled your military file, and I have in front of me a comment from your commanding officer in November of 1945 on LST 751. He wrote about you, and he says that Steve has an alert mind, a pleasing personality, and is quick to make friends. He is well liked by officers and men aboard this ship. In his duties as executive officer, he has done a fine job of maintaining discipline among the crew. A resounding endorsement there.
Well, it helps when the captain grew up with you and is your best friend.
Let's not sell yourself short, though, Steve. So what campaigns did your ship take part in?
Well, our first campaign was the Philippines campaign. We were in Leyte Gulf on D-Day for the initial invasion. And we actually beached on D-Day +2, the 22nd of October. I should go back and say that October 20th was my 20th birthday, and that was D-Day. And I forgot all about my birthday until I was coming off. I was going on watch at midnight, And I was leaving Eddie, and Eddie said, "Oh, by the way, happy birthday." That's the first I heard of it that day.
So you had to make up for that celebration the next birthday, right?
Yeah, I guess. Not sure I remember the next one, but I sure do remember that one.
Wow. So your ship was at Leyte Gulf, you said, in October?
Uh-huh.
And what was that invasion like? What kind of things did you see?
Well, we came in on the evening of D-Day. We were in Leyte Gulf. A big red moon came up over Samar Island as we were entering the Gulf. And just when we got there, a plane came out of nowhere and crashed in the water about 50 feet off our stern. And pieces of the plane wound up on the stern. And we had absolutely no idea what that was. It was a big flame burning there, and the ships behind us had to get out of line and come back in order to avoid running into the flame. We had no idea what that was. We got our first action that morning. You always went to general quarters at dawn and at dusk in the Pacific Ocean area, and of course, dawn and dusk is when the aircraft attacks would take place because your air cover had to land, and when your air cover landed, here would come the Japs, and because there was nobody up there to get, and we'd have to shoot at them.
And your ship is one of the prime targets because you are the guys actually landing soldiers on enemy shores, and so the Japanese specifically wanted to take out your ship.
In Leyte Gulf, the slope of the beach was shallow, so we couldn't get the ship all the way in to drop our ramp on the sand. So the Seabees would push out a sand berm to the ship, and it'd be all packed down by the bulldozer going back and forth over it. And then we'd drop the ramp on the berm, and our cargo would drive off. The first truck off our ship, by the way, hit a landmine about 100 yards up the beach and got blown over on his side. Of course, I don't know what happened to the driver, but we unloaded in pretty short order. We could unload in a half an hour if we had to, but we were stuck on the beach. The tide went out, and we had to spend the night on the beach that night.
Oh, that had to be pretty unnerving, under the threat of enemy attack, just being a sitting duck.
Well, the Japanese they'd send planes over all night long. And so every time a plane came over, the guy in command of the whole bay would put out what they call a flash red. They say flash red, and that meant everybody had to go to general quarters. And the idea of the thing was you didn't get any sleep because they'd fly over, everybody goes to general quarters, then they go away, you go back to bed, and then they fly over again. I remember the second time we were up there, we were on the beach, stuck on the beach all night again, and the same thing was going on. They were showing a movie on the tank deck, and finally the captain said, "Look, just quit doing that. If they say flash red, you don't do anything. You just stay here. We're going to finish watching our movie." And so that's what happened.
Even the captain was fed up with it.
Yeah.
So after Leyte Gulf, you also resupplied Mindoro, and you were at the invasion of Luzon. Is that right?
Yeah. We'd gone back to New Guinea after the initial invasion, picked up a load, came back, discharged that, and went back to an island called Biak, which was right above the neck of New Guinea, and we were to pick up soldiers there. And so we beached and picked up a load and went back to Leyte Gulf. Well, while we were there, the captain had met this Red Cross girl and kind of fell in love with her. So when we got up to Leyte Gulf, he went over on the beach and caught a plane and flew down to Biak to see this lady. And in the meanwhile, after he left, we got word that we were going to make the second resupply run to the island of Mindoro, which sits over on the Sulu Sea just south of the Big Island. And General MacArthur wanted an airstrip there to help out with the invasion. So they had invaded that sometime in early December, maybe around the 15th. And it had been one resupply run, and then we were the second one. And so we took on the load, and we went out and anchored, waiting to leave. And when we got message to leave, we were hauling up the anchor, and the captain got back.
That's a pretty close call.
The girl had already got herself another boyfriend. So he walked up to her. She said, "What are you doing here?" And he turned around, walked out, caught a plane, and got back just in time.
Oh.
And so we left Lady Gulf, went through the Surigao Straits and around into the Sulu Sea, going up to Mindoro. And from the time we left, which was a little after midnight, whoa, look at that. From the time we left until the time we got there, we were under constant attack. We lost five or six ships in the convoy, and that's when we shot down our first plane, by the way. You can see we kept, in these convoys, we would stay about 400 or 500 yards apart. The columns would be 400 or 500 yards apart, and the ships in the columns would be 400 or 500 yards apart. We were the guide ship in that convoy. And so we didn't have to worry about keeping station. Everybody had to keep station on us. But as such, we got a lot of attention. We shot down one plane, and we shot at a lot of others. And we thought we hit them, but didn't get credit for them.
The Liberty ship, the SS John Burke, was actually hit and exploded, and it was hit by a Japanese Kamikaze plane. I
was, as gunnery officer, it was my idea to keep a lookout all around to see if there's anything coming. And I happened to be looking at that ship when the suicide plane came straight down and hit it right on the main deck. And I saw a little flame burst out. And of course, it was not my job to sightsee. And I went ahead standing around looking for other planes. And by the time I got back, that's what I saw. And then the shock wave hit our ship, and it shook us from stem to stern. It killed sailors on 5 or 6 other ships that were closer than we were. I remember saying to somebody that pieces of that ship landed on the wheel a mile or so ahead of them in the convoy. Now, I'm not sure that's true anymore, but anyhow, it spread shrapnel far and wide, and there were men wounded and killed on many ships.
And so this is, being on a supply ship like the LST you were on was so dangerous because you were carrying ammunition and you weren't as fast as, say, a warship. So this was really extremely hazardous duty. And it's worth noting that a lot of LSTs were sunk during the war.
We were told going in that they expected to lose 80 to 90% of them. That didn't work out that way because most of them were in the Pacific, and the Japanese didn't resist on the beaches too much. So that they were expecting to lose them when they beached. Now, they had a lot of casualties in the Atlantic there because, excuse me, the Germans did resist on the beach, and so a lot of LSTs were lost there. We were more fortunate than they.
So, in addition to the Philippines, the Navy sent you to a lot of other places in the Pacific, didn't they?
Yeah, well, our life was, we went slow, 9 knots. We cruised at 9 knots. So if we were in the Philippines, we would be seeing action. If we had to go back to New Guinea or to Biak or someplace like that to get some more people and bring them up to the Philippines, we would have about 3 weeks with no action, unless a submarine caught us, and that happened a couple of times. We saw a lot of action in the Philippines, and were involved with a couple of submarines going back and forth to the Philippines. But generally speaking, we would have 3 weeks peace supplied, and then 4 or 5 days we would see a lot of action.
Did you have any particular place that you visited that you liked especially?
I didn't go anywhere in the Pacific that I'd want to see again. Not even Manila. Nowhere. We were all over Japan, and I was in China some after the war, and in Manchuria and French Indochina. And the only place I remember that looked nice was Lae on the east end of New Guinea, where there'd been some terrible fighting in 1942. We went back there to pick up some ordnance troops and bring them up to the Philippines, and it was just, the lawns were all mowed and the buildings were nice, and there was a very peaceful little backwater during the war. And one time, when we were at Biak, they sent us over to a little tropical island called Mios Windy, and it was a perfect little lagoon. The water was clear, and we had nothing to do for 2 days, and we anchored out in the lagoon. The guys were diving off the ship into the water. And we went to shore, and they had a whole bunch of supply depots, and their big supply depot, and nobody to give it to because they were PT based to start with, and now the war had left them behind. And they had a great big theater in the middle of the island called the Bob Hope Theater. So I guess Bob Hope had gone through there at some point. But it was just gorgeous. It was a wonderful little respite in the middle of the war. But I wouldn't want to go back.
Well, and so it took you a while to get back after the war ended.
My first night back in the States after 2 years on board ship. And I'd been in China on the LST 1026 as a commanding officer. And when I left there, they put me on a troop transport, and I came home sleeping down in a hole and eating in the crew's mess. But it was worth it.
What kind of impact did your service have on your post-war life? Do you think it changed a lot of what you ended up doing?
Well, before the war, when I was in college, I majored in drinking beer and cutting class. After the war, I wound up getting on the dean's list and getting good grades and doing everything I was supposed to do. Got into campus politics, got into all honorary fraternities. It was just, I was a different guy. A grown up. I'm more grown up than I am now, for instance.
Now you get to have fun all over again. And we thank you so much for your involvement with the museum and for talking with me today. And we've got some questions from the audience if you're up for it.
Yeah, sure.
So, says here, one of our audience members wants to know what types of cargo you were carrying to the shore.
Everything we took on board on our ship was rolling stock. In other words, they had to be driven on and driven off. We carried no bulk cargo ever at all. And so you could see, in most cases, 2-ton trucks and Jeeps and half-tracks and you name it, we carried it. On the invasion of Brunei in Borneo, we carried amphibious tanks. The only time we ever carried a tank, we carried amphibious tanks to the invasion of Borneo.
Robert Rudder asked if you ever used barrage balloons to protect your ship.
No, that didn't happen in the Pacific. I understand they did that in the European theater a lot, but we didn't use them. Okay.
And Noah, he wanted to know what it felt like watching the kamikaze attacks.
Well, to tell you the truth, I was so busy doing my job that I never had a chance to be afraid. Before we go into action and after we've been in action, I think everybody was scared, but while it was going on, we were just busy doing our job. And but it's pretty. I can't say I was terrified at the time. I can remember looking at the second plane we shot down, and he was headed right for me. And I said, "Look at that guy! I wonder if we're going to get him." And we got him.
So you have a tradition of military service in your family.
Well, my daddy was a corporal in the Army, and my great-grandfathers were all in the Civil War, and I have an ancestor in the Revolutionary, well, about 4 or 5 of them in the Revolutionary
Wow.
War. But not a military family, basically. We went for the call.
Let's see. Ernest asks what it was like to ride on a flat-bottom boat in the open ocean in bad weather, especially.
Well, we didn't pitch. If we hit a wave coming at us, we just send shock all over the ship. But we rolled, and we had the worst snapper roll you ever saw. Our first night out of New Orleans, when we were heading overseas, we got caught in a trough in a groundswell, and we were rolling over till the gunwale was going under. Every man on the ship was seasick, except for me. And everybody on the ship will tell you the same story.
There's always one guy on the ship who's not seasick at all, right? Whoever's telling the story. Oh, God. Speaking of being sick, Michaela wants to know, did you ever drink on the ship?
Well, it's against the law to do that. But
right.
We had a doctor on board from Boston, and he had access to the medicinal alcohol. And so every once in a while, you'd be out at sea, be walking down the passageway, and he'd stick his head out of his room and go, you go in there, and he'd have 200 proof alcohol and a can of grapefruit juice, and you'd get a little drink.
He was a pretty popular guy on the boat, I bet.
Very popular, wonderful doctor. Wonderful doctor.
Kept you all in ship shape. Another viewer, Dana Jones. Thanks for watching, Dana. She says, were you able to get letters out at sea, and how long did it take to get mail from your family?
The mail was an amazing thing. We might not know where we were going next, but when we got there, there'd be mail waiting for us. Anytime you went into port, the first we'd drop one of the LCVPs in the water, and he'd head off to get the mail. And more often than not, there'd be 3 or 4 sacks. I remember one time we got a sack of mail that was only a week old. Now, sometimes it'd be a month old, or maybe 2 months old, but I want to tell you, it's the best thing that happened to you was getting a letter. It really was.
Your family must have really worried about you, too, when they didn't hear from you, because you were out at sea for a while.
Yeah. They did, and I wasn't the best correspondent in the world either. I'd write these little short.
Well, in your defense, you had a lot going on, didn't you?
Well, yeah, but I had time to write. I just didn't. But
Alexis asks, how prepared did you feel for your role on the ship? When you were thrown into being a navigator, and then you go into the Philippines, where there's 7,200 islands that you could potentially hit with the ship. How did that work?
Well, by the time we got to the Philippines, I was not the navigator anymore. I gave that up after we crossed the Pacific Ocean. When we got to Espiritu Santo, I handed that off to somebody else. But to answer your question, I never felt at any time that I wasn't entirely capable of doing any job they handed to me. Today, it terrifies me to think they would give a 19-year-old kid all that responsibility. But back then, I was ready for
it. It's better to be lucky than good sometimes, and it worked out for you. We've got a lot of people thanking you for your service, Steve. Jen Guthrie, thanks for watching, and Alan Raphael. I think we've taken up enough of your time today, but we want to thank everyone for tuning in today and remind you that the National World War II Museum hosts webinars every single weekday at this same time. And thank you so much, Steve, for your service. And I look forward to seeing you again back at the museum as soon as we're back open.
Yeah, you're in Pennsylvania, huh? Yeah, and I'm in North Carolina. We'll get back there.
We'll be back. We'll all be back soon, though, I hope. Thank you so much for everyone, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening. We encourage you to visit nationalww2museum.org/podcasts for more episodes. That is nationalww2museum.org/podcasts. Don't forget to check out the events tab on our homepage at nationalww2museum.org as well to catch some of these conversations and programs in real time. The museum is marking a special year here in New Orleans. Coming at the end of 2023, we will be unveiling our capstone addition to our campus, Liberation Pavilion. The pavilion will cover the closing months of the war and the post-war years, exploring the links between World War II and today. Equally important, the museum has the privilege and honor of hosting the 2023 Congressional Medal of Honor Society's annual convention. Taking place in New Orleans from October 31st to November 4th, the convention is one of our country's most prestigious and patriotic events, providing unique opportunities for the public to engage with Medal of Honor recipients. Learn more at cmohs.org. This series is made possible by the Albert and Ethel Herstein Charitable Foundation, which supports content like this from the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. Please remember to rate and subscribe. It goes a long way to helping others find this series. I'm Jeremy Collins, signing off.